So welcome everybody to Honey Bee Watch Café. My name is Steve Rogenstein. I'm your host and moderator. I'm also the project director for Honey Bee Watch, and I'm joined by Rigo Moro, who is our science director. Cafes are our supplemental kind of connecting sessions that complement the symposia series that we have done quarterly. And in the alternate months, we've been hosting these cafes, which are informal fora for us to meet and hear from scientists and non-scientists about their research projects, their personal experiences and anecdotes. And it's an opportunity for you to share your story. So if you would like to, you can fill out an application. It's like 5 questions. It's on our events page. Rigo, if you could just type in where that is. And it's super simple. You can fill that out. We're already taking applications for the 2024 series. So what I'm going to do is turn the floor over to Julian in a second. He'll introduce himself. He's going to be talking to us today about his personal journey from conventional to more natural apiculture, as well as talk about winter foraging in temperate zones. He's based in West Wales. And then we'll talk about the nutritional value of diverse pollen and nectar sources. And if there's time, there are 2 short videos at the end. And then we'll open the floor to your questions. So Julian, would you like to, you're unmuted, I see. Would you like to start?
Yeah.
What I'll do is I will put my timer on for 14 minutes. And when it chimes, you know that you have 1 minute left. And if you would like to spend a little more time, no problem. That's just to keep you aware of the time as it passes. And then we have those 2 videos that we can show as well. So with that, I'm going to pass the floor to you if you're ready.
Yeah. Can everybody hear me and see my screen? Brilliant.
Yes.
Okay. Great. Well, yeah, I'm Julian Wormald. Thanks very much to Steve and Arrigo for this chance, this cafe slot. And I thought I would begin with a quick resume of who I am and how I've come to host a number of zero-minimal interference honeybee colonies around our property in West Wales, which was pretty much a flower-free zone when we acquired it, a derelict, about 30 years ago. I'm a retired small animal vet who became fascinated in the noughties by the diversity of moths in our local upland environment and spent a lot of time finding and photographing them. And then we began to create a garden around our house on our 11-acre smallholding. And I remember getting really excited when I started to see the first few bumblebees. But we realized that bumblebees are very vulnerable to forage supply gaps through the whole of their foraging season. So we started to grow flowers which would survive in our wet upland conditions and appeal to different bumblebees, particularly early in the season and then later on. And it was a long time later, 2009, maybe 14 years after we bought the place, when I was really pleased. I spotted the very first honeybees in the garden, just briefly in the autumn on this particular plant, which is Sedum spectabile. And by now I'd worked out that very few flowers appeal to all insect types, and it's often a very specific cultivar property. But rather like honeybees, I'm a bit of a generalist, and around the same time as this was going on, I was developing an interest in local forms of naturalized snowdrops with great variety in some sites and almost uniformity in other sites where there were quite massive naturalized populations. And I figured that in big part this might be down to whether there were or had been honeybee colonies nearby to pollinate these flowers. Because when most naturalized snowdrops flower in Wales, honeybees are the main pollinators for them. Bumblebees show very little interest for them in our garden, and most of them emerge too late in the season to be able to pollinate them anyway. And although there are very few weather windows for active foraging in a typical Welsh winter, if you've got a colony of honeybees close enough to the snowdrop flowers, which are themselves thermogenic, then hardy scouts will find them and very quickly pass the message on. So now I had a real motivation for having honeybees on site to increase the seed set for my snowdrops and obviate the need for me going around with a little paintbrush. But back then in 2009, I knew all about the downsides to keeping honeybees with colony collapses, failures, varroa, and the big expense and apparent rigidity of conventional beekeeping. So, not knowing anything else, I spent ages hollowing out a few logs and bought an expensive vial of Nasinoff pheromone and got really excited when a few scout bees turned up, and then incredibly dejected when they rejected my offering of accommodation. But over the next 6 years, we had 3 attempts where local conventional beekeepers put one of their hives on site. This was the first one, and it died out. It's poorly sited. I think it died out in the first harsh winter. And then the second was provided by the same chap who happened to be the chairman of the local beekeeping association then. But the bees were so aggressive that we had to ask him to remove it because we were getting face bumped and stung within 30 yards of this colony for several days after the guy had been and opened it up. But by now, I was starting to read a lot more about honeybees and discovering just how amazing their ecology and life cycles are. And then more recently discovered Tom Seeley's Lives of Bees in the Wild. And this coincided with another conventional beekeeper putting a hive on site in the autumn. And this did phenomenally well in the following spring. So I figured it was likely to produce a swarm soon and started building some boxes, but it beat me to it. And so I ended up having to cut the swarm into this old German butter churn, which I was thinking about modifying as a location. And it survived in that with no interventions and no frames at all for just over 2 years. So I'd also by now become aware that although there's an awful lot of discussion and information about how to house and manage honeybees in conventional beekeeping, there seemed to be very little about nutrition and forage options for them, particularly at either end of the season. And with our increasingly insect-friendly flowers in the garden, now that I had honeybees on site, I could actually see which flowers they visited late autumn, winter, and early spring, when native flowers around us are almost non-existent, apart from ivy, obviously, and a little bit of gorse. The other issue which I'd pondered for a long time was just how many colonies an area could support. So I'd read Tom Seeley's work on bees in forests in North America, but also Paul, who's here tonight, his work in Oxfordshire, finding lots of wild colonies in his village. And I reckon that allowing for inevitable losses, maybe 4 or 6 colonies would be a good target to aim for, which coincidentally seems to mirror what Philippe's recent work at Blenheim has shown up, with clusters of colonies quite close together. But a big factor in all of this, obviously, is the availability of forage. And we're very lucky that in spite of our really wet, poor weather where we live, there are great forage options right the way through from mid-spring with willows through now our wildflower meadows, and then meadows like this, unmanaged meadows like this, that are full of willow herb and brambles, and then up on the hills, heather, and even the dreaded Himalayan balsam. And I think this diversity of forage helps to support a really diverse range of insects on our land, which really shows no sign of diminishing since we've had the honeybees here as well. So following Tom Seeley's 5 top criteria for preferred nest cavities, I made 6 boxes, all cork insulated for 2020, and all were occupied by wild, or in one case, a court swarm within 2 months of setting them up. One of them can't be opened at all. 3 of them I never do at all. And then the other 2 are cork insulated national hives with foundationless frames. And I add a super to each of these in the spring and maybe get some honey off in the autumn. And that's all that I do. So no treatments, no feeding, no opening, but just quite a bit of observation. And I use a bridge camera to video them, ideally about every 2 weeks. And this gives a really good chance to notice things like the colors of the bees, whether they're taking pollen in, drone numbers, fighting, wasp level of activity. But unlike stalks at the hive entrance, because I'm not opening them up, I'm often left with quite a lot of unanswered questions. And on days when there's significant change in activity, I'll often record aspects of the current weather and do screen captures from either VentorSky or windy.com, which have these wonderful maps if people aren't familiar with them. And I'm gradually getting a feel of how these 6 independent colonies coexist. And they're all between about 30 and 50 yards apart from each other, and all have slightly different simple markings on the hive front. And colonies scout and discover very quickly if one of the others is weak, and they'll rob them out. But they also seem to scout and do preparatory cleaning of a died out colony well in advance of actually swarming and moving in. And they do this they seem to do this from very early in the year too. But one of the things that really fascinated me is the ability of a lot of these bees to forage in foul weather conditions, often quite heavy rain, strong winds, and really low temperatures, way outside the conventionally quoted honeybee comfort zone. And this varies dramatically between colonies. And I wonder if it's even influenced by what one of our neighbours told us, and he was adamant that his grandfather kept honeybees in the valley and had imported queens from Russia to improve hardiness. Now, as I learnt from Ivan, last Honeybee Cafe, whether that was actually queens from Russia or Russian queens from America, I don't know. But anyway, that's intriguing. So I wanted to finish off by focusing a bit on early and late season flowers, which we find are really attractive to our bees. And once bees have discovered that there's something worth visiting, even in January or February, they'll keep checking it out. And I'm really convinced, maybe because of my career as a vet, that such forage diversity is really important for an individual bee's gut microbiome, or maybe larval gut microbiome, let alone the microbiome of the colony itself, just as we're now starting to realize that this is pretty vital for us too. But it's also interesting that a lot of the flowers that the bees prefer at this time of the year seem to come from high altitude regions, particularly the Himalayas, that part of the world where it might be, I don't know, that nectar is more energy dense for any insects capable of surviving there. I mean, probably everyone knows, I think the largest honeybee lives outside in the Himalayas. But I don't know if there's any research onto this sort of quality of nectar issue. I do know from the work I've done with snowdrops that a lot of plants have an amazing array of chemicals within them, and just 3 here from snowdrops that humans are making use of. This is an anti-aphid lectin that people have put into genetically modified potatoes and wheat. This is a snowdrop antifreeze glycoprotein, which is used to, or development of it's used to produce soft scoop ice cream. And this is galantamine, which is used for its neuropharmacological benefits in treating Alzheimer's disease. So I just wonder if honeybees with access to snowdrop nectar and pollen are quicker witted or smarter than those fed glucose syrup and fondant over the winter. And I slotted this in. This is not obviously this is not a winter forage thing, but Poppies, as we all know, have some amazing alkaloids in them that man has used, and but they don't produce any nectar. So I'm sure, or I guess a lot of people will have seen how manic honeybees seem to be foraging pollen from inside certain types of poppy. And I wonder whether, are they actually getting something other than just pollen? Anyway, I'm going to leave that hanging in the air. And isn't it better for bees to, this again, a provocative thing to say, is it better for bees to get out and forage if they can, rather than spending the whole winter cooped up inside? And I obviously realise a lot of people, they just don't have the milder winters that we have in West Wales. So I'm going to finish up with some specific details of the favourite plants which our bees will visit through the autumn and winter, always assuming you can grow them where you live, of course. So Persicaria amplexicaulis, which flowers continuously from June to October, origin to China and the Himalayas. Persicaria vaccinifolia, which is probably our absolute favourite plant, flowers from August until first frost, so it's still flowering magnificently now, origin Tibet and Himalayas. Dahlia murkii, which is a fantastic hardy dahlia, which is from the mountains of the Sierra Madral Mexican mountains, flowers from May to October continuously. Daphne belua, which flowers from December to March, Nepal Himalayan mountains. Galanthus nivalis, which is the most common widely distributed snowdrop, which can flower depending on the clone from December to April, widespread across Europe. Crocus thomasinianus, January to March, Bulgaria, Hungary, usually up around 1,000 meters. Now, the difference between the crocus and all the others is that these flowers actually open and close. So there's a bit of a disadvantage there. The number of days in some winters when these will be open are very limited. Scylla mishenkoana, which is February to March, South Caucasus and Iran. And then finally, this is a Pieris from Japan, China mountains, Pieris japonica, called Valley Valentine. And honeybees will rob these flowers. We get early bumblebees out at this time of the year, and they'll pierce at the base of the flower here. And honeybees will do the same to get at the nectar. So that's a bit of a rattle through, but thank you for listening. And do you want me to go ahead, Steve? You haven't set a timer on me. Do you want me to show these two little video clips?
Absolutely. You're perfectly on time.
Okay, great. So there's a cut. Just bear with me because this might not be seamless. But the first one is a clip of this flower that I mentioned that this was taken about 3 days ago. We had a rare moment of low winds and sunshine, and the honeybees are all over this plant, as well as butterflies. this just anyway, this is self-explanatory. Right. There we go.
That's the end of your presentation, right?
That's the end of my presentation.
Fantastic. Thank you very much, Julian. As Rosa Maria has said, your passion is very evident, and I love that you include the science, the art, the personal passion. It's a very balanced presentation, so thank you.